Well, Malacanang is putting emphasis on the defense cooperation agreement signed, apart from
Right.
the creative industries and economic, of course. Pero what do you think? What can we achieve together with Indonesia? Of course, we're talking about similar threats,
Right.
not just geopolitical, but climate change, that kind of cooperation, which also entails
Right.
national defense. So
Right.
how can we push that cooperation further?
Yeah, I think first of all, we always talk about ASEAN multilateralism. What will the 10 ASEAN countries agree on in terms of West Philippine Sea, in terms of Myanmar, etc. But the big thing nowadays is ASEAN minilateralism, meaning cooperation among few key countries in ASEAN on special issues and real cooperation. Hindi lang yung mga, mahinang statements, etc. So I think that's where Indonesia is important to us as a de facto leader of ASEAN. Kasi pagdating sa counterterrorism, pagdating sa West Philippine Sea, pagdating sa China, maraming mga issues dyan. I think we can have mini-lateral cooperation with Indonesia in parallel to the ASEAN processes. Kasi tanggapin natin, limitado talaga makuha natin sa 10 ASEAN kung ang basis is really unanimity, not even consensus. Malamang hindi mo makuha lahat ng bansa to say yes on an issue where we want to get yes. But I think with Indonesia, if we cooperate under the aegis of ASEAN, bilateral, minilateral, we can get a lot of cooperation. By the way, for instance, meron na tayong trilateral intelligence sharing, counterterrorism, maritime patrols with both Malaysia and Indonesia in light of what happened in Marawi. And I think Indonesia could also be very helpful in terms of long-term stabilization of Mindanao as we move towards the Bangsamoro creation. Remember, big leader, Indonesia is the biggest Muslim majority country on earth. It's the third largest democracy. And eto nga actually in the past few years, under Retno Marsudi, their foreign minister, from Palestine to Afghanistan, and then earlier under Netaragawa in Cambodia and Thailand border disputes, Indonesia has been an interlocutor and mediator, right? So why can't they help us here also in the case of Mindanao, or help us with China on the West Philippine Sea front? Kaya nga sabi ko, very undertapped, underappreciated itong relationship natin with Indonesia. And I believe it's vice versa. It can go both ways. And maybe, just to add on this thing, as you may know, Indonesia also has giant fintech companies like Gojek, right? Now, I don't know if, I'm sure some companies will not be happy domestically for me saying that, but maybe Gojek can also get into the Philippines and provide us affordable, efficient kind of services that we can get from fintech companies. Because the Gojek of Indonesia is like their Alibaba. It provides all sorts of services, right? You can get a nail polish, you can get groceries, you can get ride, etc. Quite similar to some of the apps we have. So maybe Indonesia, which we don't appreciate as much, can also be a big player in the emerging digital economy in the Philippines. And I want to see also updates on that front.
What about the Filipinos in Indonesia? Richard, I remember that there was a time when Filipinos were like the quiet industrial partners. The Filipinos there in Indonesia. In fact, they used to be called the secret of Indonesia's success.
Right.
But that was like 20 some years ago. I'm wondering whether the Filipino community there is still as influential and, whether the government still views them as some kind of asset within the community.
Right. I believe whenever there's a country picking up momentum sa ASEAN, Filipinos are involved there, right? So it was Indonesia 20 years ago. More recently, it's Cambodia and Vietnam. So if you go to those Indo-China countries, ang dami mga Pinoy doon sa international school, advising with bureaucracy. Kaya nga, parang they're always surprised, like, bakit ang gulo ng Pilipinas? Ang gagaling ng mga tao niyo, sila pa nag-advise sa atin how to move forward, right? So you're absolutely right. That has been the case all across the region. You can say 50 years ago, even Singapore and Malaysia would have benefited from the Philippines human capital. So the human capital is really there. But the other thing, Lucia, perhaps we can also talk about is we have also major conglomerates in the Philippines who are increasingly internationalizing, right? These are conglomerates who are running out of market. I mean, there's just so much you can squeeze out of 100 million people with a per capita income of barely $3,000. So Indonesia, with 270 million people, right? Or 280 million people, and per capita of even higher than the Philippines, can also provide new market opportunities. Kasi napaka-similar ng Indonesia sa atin. Mga rule of law concerns. They're the only other democracy, although of course not a perfect democracy like us. So yung rule of law situation, regulatory environment in Indonesia is very similar to the Philippines. Just imagine a Philippines giant version, right? That's Indonesia. So I think for a lot of our companies who want to expand to new markets, Indonesia is a perfect one for them. We know it usually goes the other way. Indonesians are involved here in some of the projects in the Philippines, but it can go both ways because we have world-class conglomerates also in the Philippines. I think a lot of our companies are involved in Indochina, in Vietnam. I heard some Philippine companies are involved there. But Indonesia is the big prize. It's a G20 country, $1 trillion GDP, and 100 million strong consumer market. So yung middle class nila is 3 times bigger than the Philippines. So if you're a Filipino businessman, you're looking at essentially Philippines times 3, right?